At 2:14 a.m., my son texted, "All 11 of us are coming to your beach house." I told him I had pneumonia. He said, "Don't make excuses." So when they arrived Friday, every door was locked. Friday, all 11 of us are staying at your beach house. Have everything ready. The text lit up my phone screen at 2:14 a.m. I coughed, a sharp burning pain radiating through my chest. I had just returned from the urgent care clinic in Cape Cod, holding a prescription for heavy antibiotics. The diagnosis was clear, severe walking pneumonia. My body ached, and my fever hovered at 102 degrees. I stared at the message from my 33-year-old son, Julian. He didn't ask how my doctor's appointment went. He didn't ask if the house was available. He simply demanded. I slowly typed back, my hands trembling from the fever. "I can't host. I have pneumonia and need absolute quiet." The 3 dots bounced immediately. His reply was cold, stripped of any empathy. "Don't make excuses. Amanda already promised her whole family. Everyone took time off. We are coming anyway." Amanda was his wife. For 5 years, I had quietly bankrolled their lifestyle, always trying to buy the affection of a son who only called when his credit card was maxed out. I looked around my quiet living room, listening to the sound of the ocean waves outside. This beach house belonged to my late husband and me. We built it with our own hands while Julian was in high school. It was my sanctuary, the only place where I still felt close to my husband's memory. "We will bring our own groceries so you don't have to cook," Julian added, as if 11 people, 3 toddlers, and 2 large golden retrievers wouldn't cause a chaotic storm in my house. I realized then that my silence over the years had taught him that my boundaries were flexible. I had always said yes to avoid conflict. But tonight, gasping for air in my own kitchen, something shifted inside me. I didn't type a long paragraph defending my illness. I didn't beg for understanding. I just wrote back one single word. Fine. Fine didn't mean they were welcome. It meant I was done arguing, done pleading for the basic respect any human being deserved, let alone a sick mother. I set my phone face down on the granite counter. The guilt tried to creep in, familiar and heavy, telling me I was being a bad mother, that Julian was my only child. But another cough shook my frame, reminding me of reality. If I didn't protect myself, nobody else would. At 7 a.m. on Thursday, I called David, a local locksmith and an old friend of my late husband. "David, I need to change every lock on the property today," I said, my voice raspy and thin. "Front door, back door, and the guest cottage. Cancel all old keypad codes." David didn't ask intrusive questions. He knew Julian's pattern of using the house like a free resort. "I'll be there in an hour, Sharon," he replied gently. While David worked on the doors, I began preparing the house. I wasn't doing this to be cruel. I was doing it because my health required it. I cleared out the refrigerator, packing my own simple meals into a small cooler. I moved my personal belongings, my husband's old watches, and my medication into the master bedroom. I then printed a neat, clear sign on a white sheet of paper and taped it to the inside of the front glass door facing outward. It read, "Property closed. No guests permitted. This week." My phone buzzed constantly in my pocket. Amanda was sending a flurry of messages to the family group chat assigning bedrooms. "My parents get the master suite. Sharon can sleep on the pull-out couch in the study," she wrote. I watched the texts scroll by without replying. They were already moving into my home in their minds, completely ignoring the fact that I was sick. I turned off the notifications and sat on my porch, breathing in the salty air, waiting for Friday to arrive. The convoy arrived at exactly 3:30 p.m. on Friday afternoon. From my upstairs bedroom window, I watched 3 large SUVs pull into my gravel driveway. Julian's black Ford Explorer led the pack, followed by his in-laws' vehicles. Doors slammed, and suddenly my quiet front yard was flooded with noise. Loud voices, barking dogs, and the sound of heavy coolers dragging across the gravel filled the air. Amanda stepped out wearing sunglasses and a sun hat, gesturing grandly to her parents. "Welcome to our summer spot," she announced loudly. I felt a sharp pang in my chest hearing her call it their spot. They hadn't contributed a single dollar toward the property taxes, the new roof we installed last year, or the monthly utility bills. To them, it was just a free luxury. Julian walked up to the front porch first, carrying 2 heavy suitcases. He reached for the digital keypad on the front door and punched in his usual code. The lock gave a double beep, the universal sound for access denied. He frowned, shaking his head, and punched the numbers in again, harder this time. The red light flashed. "Amanda, did you change the code?" Julian called out, his irritation visible from my window. "No, why would I?" she replied, walking up the steps with a bag of groceries. Julian tried a 3rd time, then grabbed the brass doorknob and rattled it violently. It didn't budge. That was when Amanda noticed the white piece of paper taped to the glass. She stepped closer, squinting through her sunglasses, and read the words aloud. The entire driveway went completely silent. 11 people stopped moving, staring at the closed front door. The confrontation had officially begun. My phone began to ring. It was Julian. I let it ring out, the vibration buzzing against my nightstand. A moment later, a text popped up. "The lock is broken. Send the new code now. Amanda's parents are standing in the heat." I didn't reply. I poured myself a warm cup of herbal tea, wrapped my blanket tighter around my shoulders, and waited. Below, I could hear Julian pounding on the heavy oak door. "Mom, open up. We know you're in there. Stop playing games." His voice echoed through the floorboards. Amanda was on her phone now, her face flushed with anger as she spoke to someone, likely her own friends, complaining about the situation. Her mother sat back in the SUV, refusing to stay outside in the humid afternoon air. I knew I had to face them eventually. I couldn't hide upstairs like a prisoner in my own home. I put down my tea, took a deep breath that made me wince, and walked down the stairs. I didn't unlock the door. I stood behind the glass, looking directly at my son. Julian looked shocked to see me standing there. He gestured wildly to the lock. "What is this, Sharon?" Amanda yelled through the glass, dropping her polite demeanor entirely. "We drove 4 hours. We have kids out here. I told you I have pneumonia," I said, my voice muffled by the thick glass, but clear enough for them to understand. "The house is closed. I need to rest." "You're being incredibly selfish," Julian shouted, his face turning red. "It's just a cough. You're ruining a family vacation over a minor cold. Open this door right now, or I'm breaking a window." The threat of property damage crossed a line. My son was willing to destroy my home just to satisfy his wife's family. "If you touch that window, Julian, I will call the police," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The finality in my tone made him freeze. Amanda pushed past him, her eyes narrow. "Sharon, look at my parents. They are elderly. You are humiliating us in front of our family. We have reservations at the seafood restaurant tonight. Where are we supposed to go?" "There are 3 hotels within 10 miles, I replied calmly. "I suggest you start calling them before they fill up for the weekend." "We aren't paying for hotels when this big house is sitting here empty." Julian snapped. You have 4 bedrooms, Sharon. We will stay in the guest wing and won't bother you. Just let us in. I looked at my son, searching for any sign of genuine concern for my health, any recognition that I was struggling to stand upright. There was none. There was only entitlement, anger, and embarrassment that he couldn't deliver on a promise he had no right to make. I already said no, Julian. On Wednesday. You chose to ignore me, I said. This conversation is over. I turned my back on them and walked back toward the kitchen. Behind me, Amanda began screaming insults through the door, calling me a bitter, lonely woman. Julian pounded on the glass one last time, a sound that resonated deeply in my chest. A few minutes later, I heard the gravel crunch outside. I looked through the kitchen window and watched the 3 SUVs back out of my driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. They were gone, but I knew the aftermath was just beginning. The peace was quiet, but it felt incredibly heavy. By Saturday morning, my fever had finally broken, leaving me weak but clear-headed. I made a pot of coffee and opened my laptop. I didn't have to wait long to see the retaliation. Amanda had posted a lengthy status on Facebook, complete with a photo of her young nieces sitting on their suitcases in my driveway. Some people value their own comfort over family. The caption read, "We drove hours for a long-planned family reunion only to have my mother-in-law lock us out in the heat because she wanted quiet time. Our poor kids were crying. Thank goodness for the local Marriott for saving our weekend. Disappointed isn't even the word." The comments were already piling up from her extended family and mutual acquaintances. "How cruel," one wrote. "Unbelievable behavior from a grandmother," said another. Even my own sister called me an hour later. "Sharon, what on earth happened? Amanda's mother is telling everyone you had a mental breakdown and locked them out." "I have pneumonia, Ellen," I said tiredly. "I told them days in advance I couldn't host. They showed up anyway and threatened to break my windows." Ellen sighed over the phone. "Well, Julian is furious. He says he's never bringing the grandkids to see you again. Was it really worth tearing the family apart over this?" Her words stung. The accusation of tearing the family apart is the ultimate weapon used against mothers who finally say no. I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the empty chair where my husband used to sit. He would have stood on that porch with a baseball bat to protect my rest. I realized I had to stop waiting for someone else to defend me. I had to do it myself. I spent Saturday afternoon doing something I should have done years ago. I pulled out my old financial folders and bank statements from the last 5 years. I wanted to see the reality of my relationship with Julian, stripped of the emotional guilt. As I sat there with a calculator, the numbers painted a devastatingly clear picture. 3 years ago, I gave Julian $25,000 for a business investment that turned out to be a luxury boat he sold a year later at a loss. 2 years ago, I paid off $12,000 of Amanda's credit card debt so they could qualify for their home mortgage. Last summer, I paid $8,000 for their plumbing emergency while they went on a cruise to Cozumel. Total together, I had given them over $55,000 in direct financial assistance, not counting the countless dinners, groceries, and free vacations at this very beach house. And in return, when I asked for 48 hours of quiet to recover from a serious lung infection, they called me selfish and publicly humiliated me on the internet. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned out, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I had been funding my own disrespect. By constantly rescuing Julian from his own financial poor choices, I had enabled him to view me as a vending machine rather than a mother. I scanned the documents into my computer, creating a neat, PDF file. I didn't want their money back. I knew I would never see a dime of it, but I needed the truth to be documented. I wrote a short, formal email to Julian and Amanda attaching the file. We need to have a conversation when you return. Monday evening at my house. Do not bring guests. On Monday evening, Julian and Amanda walked into my kitchen. Amanda's face was set in a mask of defensive anger, while Julian looked slightly uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. They sat at the wooden dining table, crossing their arms. "We're only here because you said it was urgent." Amanda started her voice sharp. "I hope you're ready to apologize for the weekend. My parents are still furious." "I didn't invite you here to apologize, Amanda," I said, placing 3 printed copies of the financial ledger on the table in front of them. "I invited you here to set the new terms of our relationship." Julian glanced down at the numbers, his face pale. "What is this, Mom? Are you throwing old gifts in our face now?" "And these weren't gifts, Julian. They were lifelines that you begged for," I said directly. "Over $55,000 in 5 years. I gave you that money because I loved you and wanted to help your family. But this weekend, I realized that my generosity has cost me your respect." "You locked us out over a cold," Amanda shouted, banging her hand on the table. "I have pneumonia, and here is the medical report from the clinic," I said, sliding a copy of my diagnosis toward her. "You knew I was sick, but you cared more about showing off this house to your parents than my health. You allowed your family to insult me online, and you threatened to destroy my property." "We were stressed," Julian interjected, looking defensive. "Everyone was yelling at me. I didn't mean it." "But you said it, Julian. And actions have consequences," I replied, looking my son dead in the eye. The kitchen became completely silent. Amanda picked up the ledger, staring at the itemized list of her credit card debts that I had wiped clean. She opened her mouth to argue, but for the first time she couldn't find the words. The hard data on the paper killed any narrative that I was the villain. "Here is what changes now," I stated, my voice calm and absolute. "Amanda, you will take down that Facebook post tonight, and you will post a public correction stating that I was severely ill and that you showed up uninvited. If you do not, I will post this financial ledger and my medical diagnosis in the comments section of your original post." Amanda gasped. "You wouldn't dare humiliate me like that." "Try me," I said simply. "Second, the beach house keys are staying with me. You will never stay there again without me being physically present in the house. The days of using it as a free resort for your friends and in-laws are officially over." Julian looked up, panic in his eyes. "Mom, you can't do that. We already planned to come back for Labor Day." "Then you can book a hotel, Julian," I said. "And finally, there will be no more financial assistance, no more emergency loans, no more paid bills. You are both adults making good salaries. It's time you live within your means." Julian stared at me, perhaps realizing for the first time that the gentle, easily manipulated mother he knew was gone. "You're cutting us off over one bad weekend," he whispered. "No, Julian," I corrected him gently. "I am saving whatever is left of our relationship before I grow to completely resent you. Now please leave my house." They left without another word. Amanda took down the post an hour later, replacing it with a brief, stiff apology about a misunderstanding regarding my health. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to clear the air. Julian didn't call me for 3 months after that evening. It was a painful, quiet winter. There were nights I sat by the fireplace wondering if I had been too harsh, if my late husband would have approved of the distance between our son and me. I had to accept that I wasn't always right either. My years of silent compliance had played a huge role in creating the monster of entitlement they had become. I had traded long-term respect for short-term peace. But as the months passed, something remarkable happened. My bank account stayed stable. The constant anxiety that gripped my stomach every time my phone buzzed completely disappeared. I recovered fully from my illness, my lungs growing stronger with every morning walk along the beach. In early spring, Julian called. His voice was different, quieter, less demanding. He didn't ask for money. He asked how my garden was doing and if he could bring the kids over for a Sunday lunch at my house. I said yes, but I kept the boundaries firm. Looking back at that Friday afternoon on the porch, I realized the locks weren't a weapon used to hurt my family. They were a shield used to protect my dignity. Setting boundaries with the people you love is the hardest thing a mother can do because it requires you to endure their anger to save their character. True justice within a family isn't about punishing your children. It's about refusing to let them destroy the love you worked a lifetime to build.
She said it right to my face, calm as you please, while my son stood 20 feet away laughing with his groomsmen. After the ceremony tomorrow, Donna, you won't be needed anymore. Those were her exact words. I drove home that night shaking so hard I had to pull over twice. And the next morning, I didn't go to the church. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the wedding was over before it ever started. But the reason why, that's the part nobody saw coming. Not even me. My name is Donna, and I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a school librarian in Columbus, Ohio, which sounds quiet and unimportant until you realize it means I spent 3 decades watching children learn to read, watching them fall in love with stories, watching them become people. I raised my son the same way I shelved books, carefully, with attention to what belonged where. His name is my son, and I'll call him that here because this story is mine to tell, not his. He was 26 when all of this started, a structural engineer with a firm downtown. The kind of young man who holds doors open for strangers and tips 20% even on bad service. I'd raised him alone after my husband passed from a heart attack when my son was 11. It was just the two of us for 15 years, and we were good at it. We had our rhythms. Sunday dinners, baseball games on the radio, a standing phone call every Tuesday night no matter what. Then he met her. I'll call her my daughter-in-law, though she never became that. He'd introduced us in early spring, at a restaurant downtown. Not fancy. Just a neighborhood Italian place where they knew his name. She was 30, worked in real estate development, had the kind of confident handshake that made me think she'd been coached on first impressions. Beautiful in a way that seemed deliberate. Smile that arrived half a second after it should have, like it had to travel from her brain to her face instead of just happening. Her name was Sabrina. Her parents were the Holloways, Clifton and Nadette Holloway, who I was told had built a very successful property management company in the 1990s, and were, by all appearances, extremely comfortable. Her father wore the kind of watch my late husband would have called a mortgage payment on your wrist. Her mother wore the kind of smile that said she was measuring the distance between you and her. I liked my son's happiness. That part was real. He lit up around Sabrina in a way I hadn't seen before. But something in my chest went sideways the very first night, when she touched his arm and said, "Cameron talks about you so much," and then immediately turned back to him without waiting to hear what I might say in response. I told myself I was being suspicious. Mothers of only children sometimes are. The months leading up to the engagement were a slow subtraction. Our Tuesday calls shortened first, then Sunday dinners got moved to whenever we can make it work. By August, I was finding out things about my own son's life, through comments people made at church, through photos on his social media, through a congratulatory text from his cousin about a promotion I hadn't heard about. He proposed to Sabrina in September. He called to tell me that part he got right, but there was a quality to his voice that I'd never heard before. Careful. Like a man choosing his words for an audience. I later understood that she was in the room. The engagement party was at the Holloway house in Dublin, Ohio, about 40 minutes north of where I live. The house was the kind that has a name for the driveway, a circular one, with landscaping that required a staff to maintain. I wore my navy blazer, the one I'd bought for my retirement party 2 years prior. I felt the moment I stepped inside that I had dressed for the wrong occasion. Not underdressed exactly, but differently dressed. The way a paperback feels wrong sitting on a shelf of leather-bound volumes. Clifton Holloway greeted me with the name The Librarian. before he remembered to use my actual name. His wife Nadette touched both my hands in a way that felt like an inspection. They were gracious in the way people are gracious when they've already decided what you are. At dinner, the subject of the wedding came up. The Holloways had a venue in mind, a restored estate outside the city, the kind of place that charged by the hour for the parking. 400 guests. A planner who'd worked on events I'd seen in magazines. I said I would like to contribute something. I have some savings. Not lavish, but something. Nadette smiled at me the way you smile at a child who offers you a crayon drawing for your gallery wall. That's so generous of you, Donna. We'll keep that in mind. My son looked at his plate. I drove home that night telling myself to be patient, that this was a new chapter for him and I needed to let it open on its own terms. But the feeling in my chest didn't go away. By November, I'd noticed a pattern I didn't have a name for yet. Every time I managed a real conversation with my son, Sabrina's name was embedded in it like a splinter. Sabrina thought he should look into a different investment account. Sabrina's father had mentioned a connection at a development firm that could be more lucrative than his current position. Sabrina believed he was undervaluing his skill set. Small things individually, as a set, they pointed somewhere. The prenuptial agreement I found out about by accident. I had come to drop off a casserole. I know how that sounds, like something from a sitcom, the meddling mother with a covered dish. But my son had mentioned he'd been working late and not eating properly, and I had made too much brisket, and that was the truth of it. The doorman of his building knew me and let me up. My son wasn't home yet. He'd told me where the spare key was months ago, at a point when things were easier between us, and so I let myself in and put the casserole in the refrigerator. His laptop was open on the kitchen table. I wasn't looking for anything. I was pulling a sticky note off the pad to leave him a message, and that's when I saw the document on the screen. Not the full text, just enough. The words income allocation, and designated trustee, and the name Clifton Holloway. I stood there for a moment. I knew I shouldn't read someone else's document. I also knew that designated trustee is not language that belongs in a prenuptial agreement the way it appeared there. I read it. I am not going to pretend I felt calm. My hands went cold. The kind of cold that starts in the fingers and works its way up your arms. What I was reading, as far as I could understand it, and I am a librarian, not a lawyer, but I can parse language, was a document that would require my son to route 65% of his income into a jointly managed account, managed by Clifton Holloway, for a period of 12 years following the marriage. There was additional language about real estate investments requiring Holloway family approval, about financial decisions being subject to review by a family council that appeared to consist entirely of Holloways. I took photographs with my phone, 7 of them. My hands were shaking enough that 3 came out blurred. Then I closed his laptop exactly the way I'd found it, took my sticky note with me, and left without leaving a message. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. My younger sister lives in Cincinnati, and she'd been a paralegal for 22 years before she retired. I called her that evening. Her name is my sister, and she has always been sharper than me on paper, faster to see through things. I read her what I'd photographed. She was quiet for a long time. "Donna," she said finally, "that's not a prenup, that's a financial receivership." She came up to Columbus the following weekend. We spread the photographs across my kitchen table and went through them together. She called a friend of hers, a retired family attorney named Mr. Ashby, who looked at the images and said something I keep coming back to. This is the kind of document that gets drafted when someone needs a reliable income stream and doesn't have one of their own. That was when we started looking at the Holloways. My sister is better at this than I am. She spent 2 weeks finding things that weren't on any front page. Property liens, dissolved business entities, a lawsuit from 2019 that had been settled quietly, Clifton Holloway's property management company, Holloway Development Group, had been hemorrhaging money since a series of bad investments in commercial real estate. The company that had looked so solid from the outside had approximately $4 million in outstanding debt, and a set of creditors who were getting restless. The Holloways weren't wealthy. They were maintaining the appearance of wealth, the way you maintain a facade on a condemned building. The estate north of the city had 2 mortgages on it. The Watch Clifton war was real, which told you something about what he chose to spend money on when he had it, and what he chose to keep when he didn't. My son was not marrying into a successful family. He was being positioned as a solution to one. I tried to tell him, once, in January, over coffee at the diner near his office. I was careful. I said I had some concerns about the prenuptial agreement, that there were aspects of it I thought he should have independently reviewed. He looked at me across the table with an expression I had not seen on his face since he was a teenager. Sabrina said you might do this, he said. Do what? Find something to be worried about. He stirred his coffee. She said you've had a hard time accepting that I'm building my own life. The floor dropped out from under me, but I didn't show it. I said, I'm not trying to interfere with your life. I'm asking you to have a lawyer you trust look at that document. I trust Sabrina. She's not a lawyer. He paid the check and hugged me goodbye at the door, and his arms held me the same way they always did. But something had shifted underneath the gesture, and we both knew it. I drove home and sat with the casserole dish I'd never delivered, and the photographs I'd taken, and the knowledge that my window was closing. The rehearsal dinner was on a Friday evening in May, at a restaurant in the Short North neighborhood. Candlelit. Exposed brick. The kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices, because if you need to know the prices, you're in the wrong place. I had borrowed a dress from my sister. I was not going to give Nadette Holloway the satisfaction of seeing me in something she could dismiss. I arrived early, which is my nature. I was a librarian for 31 years. I was always early. My son came to greet me the moment he saw me across the room, and for a moment he was just himself again, the boy I'd raised, and he hugged me and said, I'm glad you're here, Mom. And I believed him. Whatever had been done to the space between us, he had not done it on purpose. Sabrina found me an hour into the evening, when my son had gone to speak with the wedding officiant. She appeared beside me the way weather appears, gradually, and then all at once. You look lovely, Donna, she said. She sounded like she meant it, which made it worse. Thank you, so do you. We stood together for a moment watching the room. It was almost companionable. Then she said, I think we should talk about tomorrow. I said, all right. I need you to understand that after tomorrow, our family is going to need some time to settle into itself. The first year of marriage it's delicate. She turned to look at me. I think a little space would help everyone. Space, I repeated. Quarterly visits, holidays on rotation, that kind of thing. She said it so reasonably, like she was proposing a schedule for a shared storage unit. I love him, and I know you love him, but two strong women in a man's life can create friction. I'm sure you understand. I looked at her. You're asking me to limit contact with my son. I'm asking you to respect the boundaries of a new marriage. And if I don't agree to this, her voice didn't change, still warm, still pleasant, then I think the next few years are going to be quite uncomfortable. For you. She picked up her glass of water from the table beside her. After the ceremony tomorrow, Donna, you won't be needed anymore. She walked back toward the Holloway table. Her mother looked up as she approached. They exchanged a small nod that I wasn't supposed to see but did. I stood there for what felt like a long time. My son was laughing at something across the room. The candlelight was very pretty. I said goodbye to him before I left, kissed his cheek, told him I'd see him tomorrow. He didn't notice anything in my voice. He was 26 and happy and had no reason to look. I drove home. I sat in my kitchen until 11:30 that night, not sleeping, not really thinking, just sitting with all of it. The photographs on my phone, my sister's notes, the document on my son's laptop, Sabrina's voice saying, you won't be needed anymore with the pleasant casualness of someone turning off a lamp. My sister called at midnight. She'd been up too. I found something else, she said, about Clifton Holloway. The something else was this. Clifton Holloway was not just in debt. He was under investigation. A former business partner had filed a complaint with the Ohio Division of Securities 8 months prior, alleging that Clifton had misrepresented the financial status of investment properties to attract private investors. The investigation was ongoing. It had not yet become public. If this goes anywhere, my sister said, he's looking at securities fraud charges, and he needs my son's income to pay his investors back before it does. That's my read. Yes, I sat with that for a moment. He's not gambling on the wedding. He's buying time. Donna, my sister said carefully. What are you going to do? What I did. I did not go to the wedding. That was the decision I made at 1 a.m, sitting at my kitchen table. Not because I was afraid. Because I understood, finally, the geometry of the situation. If I stood up in a church full of people who'd already been told I was an overbearing woman who couldn't let go, anything I said would become proof of exactly that. Sabrina had built a room with one exit and pointed me toward it, so I didn't go through it. Instead, at 6:15 in the morning, I emailed my son. I had drafted it 3 times. The final version was not long. I said, I love you more than anything in this world. I am not at the church today because I need you to read what I'm sending before you make a permanent decision. Everything in the attached files is documented. The source is your mother, who has never lied to you. What you do with it is your choice. It will always be your choice. I love you. I attached the photographs of the document. My sister's research notes, the information about the securities investigation. I pressed send at 6:22. The ceremony was at 10. Then I sat in my kitchen and waited. At 8:47, my phone rang. My son. Mom. His voice sounded scraped. I'm here. I might need to. He stopped, started again. I showed this to my friend Wyatt. He does contracts. He read the prenup and he said, another stop. He said it was the most predatory document he'd seen outside of a debt collection context. I didn't say anything. And the investigation. If this is real, it's real. I wouldn't have sent it if it wasn't real. A long silence. I could hear him breathing. I had heard him breathing in all kinds of emotional states over 26 years, and this one I recognized. The careful breathing of someone trying to get their bearings in the dark. I have 400 people coming to a church in 2 hours, he said. I know. What do I do? I can't tell you that, sweetheart. I really can't. And I meant it. The answer had to be his. He said, I'll call you back. He didn't call back. What he did was go to the church. I know this because my cousin's daughter Petra— no, wait, I cannot use that name. It is in the file. My cousin's daughter was a guest. I'll call her my cousin's daughter. She texted me at 10:50 to say that my son had arrived, not in his suit, and had walked past everyone to find Sabrina before the ceremony. She texted again at 11:15. Something is happening. People are waiting. And again at 11:40. He just spoke at the microphone. They're not getting married. I am not going to describe what happened in that church, because I was not there for it. And it is not my story to tell in full. What I know from my son, from the conversations we've had in the months since, is that he confronted Sabrina privately first, then walked out and told their guests the truth. Not cruelly. He read the room and said something like, I've learned some things in the last few hours that I should have known before today. I'm sorry for bringing you all here. I'm sorry I didn't protect everyone's time better than this. And then he thanked them for being people he trusted enough to have in the room. That last part is the part that makes me know I raised him right. The Holloways left before the guests had finished processing what had happened. Clifton Holloway apparently attempted to speak to my son on his way out, and my son said something to him that my son will not repeat to me. But his friend Wyatt said it was the most composed thing he'd ever heard a person say in that kind of moment. I was sitting on my porch when my son arrived at my house at 2 in the afternoon, still in the khakis and button-down he'd worn to the church. He sat down next to me on the porch steps without saying anything for a full minute. Then he said, I keep thinking about the cake. We had ordered him a small cake for a family celebration the week before. Nothing fancy. A chocolate layer cake from the bakery on 5th Street. We'd eaten half of it and put the rest in my refrigerator. Do you want some? I asked. Yeah, he said. I kind of do. So we went inside and sat at my kitchen table and ate chocolate cake out of the pan with 2 forks, and he started talking. And I mostly listened, and outside the light changed the way Ohio light changes in May, long and gold and going on longer than you expect. He stayed for a week. He slept on my couch, which is too short for him, which has been true since he was 14, and he didn't complain about it once. He was not all right. I want to be honest about that. He had loved Sabrina, or he had loved who he understood her to be, and the difference between those two things is not something you can reason yourself out of quickly. He grieved it the way he grieved things. Quietly, in short bursts, and then getting up and making coffee and moving forward. The Holloway situation became public about 3 weeks later. The securities investigation had been accelerating before the wedding. Clifton had been in the process of trying to use the prenuptial arrangement as collateral evidence of financial stability, and when that collapsed, one of his creditors panicked and went to the press. The Columbus Dispatch ran a story. It was not a big story, nothing national, but in the circles where the Holloways had maintained their facade, it was sufficient. We did not hear from Sabrina for 2 months. When I did hear from her, it was a voicemail on a Sunday evening. She sounded like someone who had been doing hard thinking and was not quite done with it. She said she was sorry. She said it in a few different ways, and none of them sounded like performance. She said she knew what her father had been doing, and that she had convinced herself it was survivable, that my son was strong enough, that the money would help people she loved without really hurting him. She said she had been wrong about all 3 of those things. She also said something I did not expect. She said, I told myself your son was lucky to have a woman like you fighting for him, and then I thought, why didn't I have that? Why wasn't anybody fighting for me? I've thought about that a lot since. I did not call her back that day. I thought about it for a week, and then I did. I kept it short. I said I was glad she was finding her footing, and I meant it, and that was the end of the conversation. My son called me the next Tuesday, right on time. Was that Sabrina's number in your recent calls? He asked. Yes. A pause. What did you say to her? I said I was glad she was doing all right. And I meant it. He was quiet for a moment. You're a better person than me? No, I'm not, I said. I've just had more practice. He laughed, a real one. The first real laugh I'd heard from him in weeks, and it sounded like a door opening in a room that had been closed too long. It's been 8 months now. My son is still at his engineering firm. He has not started over. He's picked up where he left off. And in some ways where he left off is better than it would have been, because he got out before 65% of his income was routed somewhere he hadn't chosen. He's been doing volunteer work with a housing nonprofit on weekends. He called it recalibrating, which is an engineer's word for grief, and I find it charming. He is not seeing anyone. He says he's not in a rush. I believe him. 2 weeks ago, he came for Sunday dinner. I made brisket. The same recipe I'd been trying to deliver the night this all started, which I find fitting. We ate at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat up until midnight reading research notes. And then we watched baseball on the television in the living room, and he fell us asleep before the 7th inning. And I covered him with the blanket from the back of the couch and turned the volume down and did not move him. He's 31 years too big for that couch, and he always will be. I thought about what Sabrina had said on that voicemail, about nobody fighting for her. I don't know her story fully, and I don't pretend to. I know she made choices that were wrong, choices that would have cost my son years of his life and most of his financial stability. I also know that people make those choices when they have been taught that money is the only safety that exists, when they have watched a father perform wealth so long that the performance became the only truth they knew. I can hold both of those things. What I can't do is be sorry that I intervened. I'm not sorry. I would do it again. Carefully, yes, and differently in a few places, but I would do it again, because my son deserved to make a real decision with real information. And he wasn't going to get that from anyone else in that situation. He woke up in the 8th inning, looked around for a second like he'd forgotten where he was, and then settled back into himself and said, "Did I miss much?" 2 runs, I said. "You were asleep for about 45 minutes. Good nap," he said. "Good nap," I agreed. The game went into extra innings. We stayed up to watch it end, the 2 of us on that too small couch, Ohio going dark outside the window, just the way it always has.